The Fall of the House of Usher, Part 1. It was a dark and soundless day near the end of the year, and the clouds were hanging low in the heavens. Automatically, we mention heavens. So what's the opposite of heaven? We're going straight into hell. All day I'd been riding on horseback through country with little life or beauty, and in the early evening I came within the view of the House of Usher. I do not know how it was, but with my first sight of the building, a sense of heavy sadness filled my spirit. I looked at the scene before me, at the house itself, at the ground around it, at the cold stone walls of the building, at its empty eye-like windows, and the few dead trees. I looked at the scene, I say, with a complete sadness of soul, which was no healthy, earthly feeling. There was a coldness, a sickening of the heart in which I could discover nothing to lighten the weight of how I feel. Have you ever felt that way? Walking into somewhere and just the very air itself felt heavy. Like you can't explain it. But there was something that just sent the hairs on the back of your neck awry, and you feel it. What was it? I asked myself. What was it that was so fearful, so frightening in my view of the House of Usher? This was a question to which I could find no answer. I stopped my horse beside the building on the edge of the dark and quiet lake, and there I could see reflected in the water was a clear picture of the dead trees and of the house with its empty eye-like windows. So to call a house, that's a weird way of looking at it. He looked at the front of the house and the windows were like the eyes. Well, eyes only belong on which kinds of creatures, on which things? Things that are alive. But we know that a house cannot be alive, right? I was going to spend several weeks in this house of sadness, this house of gloom. Its owner was named Roderick Usher. We had been friends when we were boys, but many years had passed since our last meeting. A letter from him had reached me, a wild letter which demanded that I reply by coming to see him. He wrote of an illness of the body, of a sickness of the mind, and of a desire to see me, his best and indeed his only friend. It was the manner in which all of this was said, it was the heart in it, which did not allow me to say no. Although as boys we had been together, I really knew little about my friend. I knew, however, that his family, a very old one, had long been famous in its understanding of all the arts, and for many quiet acts of kindness to the poor. So these people, they're weird, but they're not inherently evil. They're patrons of the arts. They help, they do charitable acts. I had learned too that the family had never been a large one, with many branches. The name had always been passed from father to son, and when the people spoke of the House of Usher, they included both the family and the family home. I again looked up from the picture of the house reflected in the lake to the house itself. A strange idea grew in my mind, an idea so strange that I can tell it was only to show the force of the feelings which laid their weight on me. I really believed that around the whole house and the ground around it, the air itself was different. It was not an air of heaven. It rose from the dead, decaying trees, from the gray walls and the quiet lake. It was a sickly, unhealthy air that I could see, slow-moving, heavy and gray. Shaking off from my spirit what must have been a dream, I looked more carefully at the building itself. The most noticeable thing about it seemed to be its gray age. None of the walls had fallen, yet the stones appeared to be in a condition of advanced decay. So its inside was still holding up, but its outside had started to rot. Perhaps the careful eye would have been discovered the beginning of a break in the front of the building, a crack making its way from the top down the wall until it became lost in the dark waters of the lake. I rode over a short bridge to the house. A man who worked in the house, a servant, took my horse and I entered. Another servant of quiet step led me without a word through many dark turnings to the room of his master. Much that I met on the way added, I do not know how, the strangest of which I had already spoken, while the objects around me, the dark wall coverings, the blackness of the floors, and the things brought home from long forgotten wars, And while these things are like the things I had known since I was a baby, while I admitted that all of this was only what I had expected, I was still surprised at the strange ideas which grew in my mind from these simple things. So it's inexplicable. It's not like what he was seeing was weird. All walls have tapestries, all floors, can be dark in the shadows. It wasn't like there was something about it going like skulls hanging from the ceiling or anything like that, but it was still that feeling, that there was just that feeling that surrounded this place. The room I came into was very large and high. The windows were high and pointed at the top. That's a characteristic of Gothic architecture, by the way. And so far above the black floor that they were quite out of reach. Only a little light, red in color, made its way through the glass and served to lighten the nearer and the larger objects. My eyes, however, tried and failed to see into the far high corners of the room. Dark coverings hung upon the walls. The many chairs and tables had been used a long, long time. Books lay upon the room, but it could give no sense of life. I felt sadness hanging over everything. No escape from this deep, cold gloom seemed possible, and as I entered the room, Usher stood up from where he had been lying and met me with a warmth which at first I could not believe was real. A look, however, at his face told me that every word he spoke was true. We sat down, and for some moments, while he said nothing, I looked at him with a feeling of sad surprise. Surely no man had ever changed as Roderick Usher had. Could this be the friend of my early years? Is it true that his face had always been unusual? He had gray, white skin, eyes large and full of light. Imagine raw chicken that had been stuck out on the counter for a little bit too long, not spoiled, but the flesh takes on like a kind of grayish hue. That was the color of his flesh, of his face, was just this kind of raw, grayish chicken color. Oh crap, where was I? Okay. Eyes large and full of light, lips not bright in color, but of a beautiful shape, a well-shaped nose, hair of great softness, a face that was not easy to forget. And now the increase in the strangeness of his face had caused so great a change that I almost did not know him. The horrible white of his skin and the strange light in his eyes surprised me and even made me afraid. His hair had been allowed to grow, and in its softness it did not fall around his face, but seemed to lie upon the air. It could not, even with an effort, see in my friend the appearance of a simple human being. In his manner, I saw at once changes came and went, and I soon found that this resulted from an attempt to quiet a very great nervousness. I had indeed been prepared for something like this, partly by his letter and partly by remembering him as a boy. His actions were at first too quick and then too quiet. Sometimes his voice was slow and trembling with fear and quickly changed to strong, heavy, carefully spaced, too perfectly controlled manner. So when he spoke, it was so carefully. Every word he chose was the word that he wanted to use. Unlike your teacher who rambles all over the place about 10 different subjects in one sentence. No, his words are this carefully orchestrated play, this dance. But then sometimes he would speak and his voice would tremble like he was afraid. So there was no consistency with this man. It was this manner that he had of the purpose of my visit, of his desire to see me, and of this deep delight and strength he expected me to give him. He told me what he believed to be the nature of his illness. It was, he said, a family sickness, and one from which he could not hope to grow better. But it was, he added at once, only a nervous illness, which would without a doubt soon pass away. It showed itself in a number of strange feelings. Some of those he told of me. Carl interrupted. Interest me were beyond my understanding. Perhaps the way in which he told me of them added to their strangeness. He suffered much from a sickly increase in the feeling of all the senses, and he could eat only the most tasteless food. All flowers seemed too strongly for his nose. His eyes were hurt by even a little light, and there were few sounds which did not fill him with horror. This sounds awful. He can't eat. He can't see light. Every single sound scares him. A certain kind of sick fear was completely his master. I shall die, he said. I shall die. I must die of this fool sickness. In this way, and no other, I shall be lost. I fear what will happen in the future. Not for what happens, but for the result of what happens. I have indeed no fear of pain, but only fear of its result, of terror. I feel that the time will soon arrive when I must lose my life and my mind and my soul together in some battle with that horrible enemy, fear. So I don't know if any of you are this way, but like, for example, with me, my husband would deploy often, sometimes 2 or 3 times a month. He would just have to leave for days, weeks, sometimes months or years at a time. It was heartbreaking, but it wasn't so much when he was gone that I was afraid. It was the time leading up to it. That what if, what if this happens? What if that happens? And Roderick is similar. He's not worried about dying. He's not worried about pain. It's the fear that leading up to it that is what what he is afraid of. I'm so sorry, guys. This is Carl. Okay, let's stay tuned for part 2.